Welcome to a new video. This will be looking into discovering DIDAS. DIDAS is nothing but discovered double attacks in chess. The heart of tactics lies in double attacks, and we will be discovering discovered attacks. Welcome. Okay, so here there's a slightly different kind of puzzle. I've given you the position, and I'm telling you that black has just played right now. I want you to find what was the last move played. You can choose between one of the three answers. Is it bc5? Is it rook d2? Or is it king g7? So it's not your typical type of puzzle, but it makes you think critically because you have to first notice, you have to observe what's happening on the board, and you will observe that there is a check here. So if it were a check, then obviously the bishop must have moved. That would be a logical conclusion. But if the bishop moved, there's also an attack of the rook on the bishop. So why did black move the bishop and give a check instead of, let's say, just take rook takes bishop? And if that's the case, why did white just let the bishop die? Was there something happening here? The plot thickens. We got to think more about it. Is it possible at all that there's king g7? Like, white bishop gave a check and king moved to g7. Now, of course, all of this is under the assumption that we're playing some sane chess. It's not some absurd chess that's going on here. So let's take one by one. Now, if the line of thought is that white bishop gave a check by moving bishop to d5 and hence king moved to g7, that is also absurd because why did the rook capture the bishop? Why did the king move? But more importantly, it's super absurd because white is already under check. So while he's under check, he's obliged to protect his king, not to give a counter check. That's not a possibility in chess. So if the counter check is not possible, then king g7 is completely ruled out. Now comes the question of, is it bishop c5 or rook d2? It's absolutely possible that bishop c5 could be the check right now. And this is what we call as Weissenzugen chess, where white would respond to the check by moving the king and then the rook can capture the bishop. But then it kind of is tricky because why has white just given up his bishop? Because a check is just a distraction for a minute. Because once a check is kind of taken care of, the bishop is going to get captured. So what could have been white's previous move if bishop c5 were to be the correct answer. Now, if that's not the case, can the other answer be rook d2? And that's absolutely possible because the rook could have been on f2, where there is actually an attack on the king, but it was discovered by moving the rook to d2. That's a very, very high possibility in this particular position, where white didn't make any blunder. Probably, for all you know, he pushed the pawn or he captured some pawn on d7. And he thinks that, hey, I'm going to be promoting the pawn. But little did he know that there's a discovered check with rook d2. Once the king moves, rook captures the bishop and also prevents the pawn from promoting. This could be like a perfect line of logical moves. But still, there's a bit of a confusion whether bishop c5 could have still been possible. But I would bet that rook d2 was the answer. Let's take another one. White just moved here. Choose the best answer. And in fact, I would say I'm not even going to give you choices. You should be able to find out the previous move right from looking at the position. So observe the position and you'd see that there's actually two checks going on. The knight is also giving a check to the king and the bishop is also giving a check to the king. Now, if the pieces moved individually to give a check, then the other check must have already existed. Now, that's not possible in chess. You cannot make a move when your opponent is already under check. In fact, the game is sane only if before you make a move, your opponent is not under check, right? Because if he's under check, you can just capture the king if it's your turn. So the only logical conclusion here is that both these checks must have originated at the same time. And that's possible only with a discovered double attack. In this case, the knight must have been on e4, and by moving to f6, he's able to discover both the checks. The direct check from the knight and the discovered check from the bishop. Now, this particular motif, a pattern of two checks happening simultaneously or two attacks happening simultaneously is what we call as DIDAS. So let's try and understand this a little deeper. Let's simplify it a lot. Just let's take the bare minimum pieces. Observe the board here. What do you see on the board? Do you see a bishop? That's already kind of giving a check to the king. This is what we call as the discoverer. Do you see the knight? The knight is the one which is blocking the bishop's path to the king, and this is what we call as the blocker. In one move, both the discoverer and the blocker can turn attackers and give a possible check and an attack. That is the essence. So what's the move? Knight moves to f3 or to e2, and in one shot, the bishop is giving a check to the king and the knight is attacking the queen. This is DIDAS, discovered double attacks. Okay, this is the short form that kind of helps you remember, discovered double attacks. Now, what are the different types of discovered double attacks? The first type is a diagonal attack, a diagonal DIDAS. A diagonal DIDAS, who can be the discoverer in this? It has to be either the bishop or the queen, right? The bishop or the queen are the only pieces that can give a diagonal long range attack. Who can be the blocker? Knight, yes. Rook, yes. King with some reservations, and pawn as well. So in this case, knight has to move to f6 just like the last puzzle, and that would be a discovered double attack. So basically, all you're looking for is the blocker should be anything non-bishopy. It can't be a queen because it would already be under check, and that would be absurdity. The second type of DIDAS is the rank and file DIDAS, which is who can be the discoverer here? It has to be the rook or the queen. Who can be the blocker? Again, the knight, maybe the bishop, could be the king or pawn. So basically anything non-rooky for the blocker. And if you have this, the same knight f6, f3 allows you a double attack in this case. Let's do an analysis here. Now there are two types of DIDAS. There's a diagonal and a rank and file. There are discoverers and blockers. And I've just put the grid together and I've highlighted the queen. Why? Because the queen is the common attacker in both types of attacks. And therefore, it gives you an idea of how powerful the queen is when it comes to tactics. I've also highlighted knight being the blocker. Why is that so important? Because that's the common part between both of them. And knight plays this role of usually blocking attack lines and then suddenly allowing for discovered attacks to happen. The king and pawn are also common, but it's not so often that you see something with kings and pawns. And they're also limited in their range of attack, not so much as the knight. The knight can actually move around. So this gives you an overview, a different perspective of how these tactics can emerge. And since you learn how they emerge, it is something that you can apply in your game. So what are the next steps? Deconstructing DIDAS should help you practice the discovered attacks, double checks, and checkmate. So you can go to Lichess or chess.com or Step Chess, any of the website that has these tons of categorized puzzles under this particular topic. Just look for discovered attacks, double checks, and even checkmate sometimes can have them. Practice a lot of that. Try and observe and categorize it. Is it a diagonal DIDAS? Is it a rank and file DIDAS? Who's the discoverer? Who's the blocker? Ask these questions and somehow your meta level thinking is going to improve as a result of that. Think about how such setups, how to set up such situations. So in a position, you think about, in a game, you think about, where are my long ranges? Do I have a long diagonal, an open diagonal? Do I have an open file? And if so, can I bring my own pieces, which typically are brought in for completely different purposes? But when they're removed as blockers, all of a sudden you can unleash a lot of attack. Finally, follow this channel for more insightful videos, checkmate patterns, calculation, and pattern recognition skills. Click on the subscribe button if you already haven't. Click on the bell icon if you'd like to be notified about any fresh videos that I usually post once a week. And please share if you found this insightful, and leave your comments to share your thoughts.